Is Africa's future being sacrificed for Chinese cash? Let's find out. Hi, my name is Janita Maaya. Welcome to my YouTube channel. A gentle reminder to please subscribe to this channel for lots and lots of more interesting and, entertaining videos. Let's get right to it. Now, recently, a French court ordered China to seize Nigeria's presidential jets because of an unpaid debt. I want you guys to watch this before I just jump right in.
In a dramatic turn of events, the Nigerian government finds itself in a high-stakes battle to recover 3 of its prestigious presidential jets seized by a French court amidst a complex international dispute. The jets, currently undergoing maintenance in France, have become the focal point of a legal and diplomatic showdown involving a Chinese company and a years-old contract dispute. But what led to this unprecedented seizure, and why is it causing such a stir? Let's dive into the heart of this gripping saga. On Thursday, the Nigerian government launched an urgent legal and diplomatic counteroffensive after a French court authorized the seizure of 3 jets from Nigeria's presidential air fleet. The aircraft, a Dassault Falcon 7X, a Boeing 737, and an Airbus 330, are the center of a fierce dispute involving Zhongshan Fusheng Industrial Investment Company Limited, a Chinese firm. The court's decision has prohibited Nigeria from moving or selling these jets until a $74.5 million debt owed to Zhongshan.
There you have it, guys. $74.5 million. Just like imagine that amount of money and imagine what Nigeria may have to do to make sure they pay back that amount. Now, I did read some of the comments from that particular video, and people were saying, you know what, a contract is a contract and Nigeria should definitely pay back the money that it took. Obviously, if you know contract law 101 is that if you enter in a contract, a legally binding contract with anyone, you have to honor that contract, and no matter what circumstances there are, you have to do what the contract says, right? That's like, it's just basic, business 101, right? There's that. I do feel like China is now collecting on its various debts all over the African continent, because we know that there are so many African countries that are actually in debt to the Chinese. And now it's time to pay up. And guess what? The African countries do not have the money to give to the Chinese, and the Chinese are resorting to, I wouldn't say confiscating the jets is like an extreme measure. I mean, economically, or the symbol of it is that they can take what they want to make sure they get their money back, right? But when you think about it, it's just like, okay, they are jets. How are those jets helping any Nigerian, honestly, apart from the president himself and maybe his people or his entourage? When you think about it, I feel like a jet is a small thing compared to what else they could have taken. God forbid they took like some oil rights to something, or they decided to take up a whole road or a whole dam, as we're going to see in this video. Now, one thing is for sure, this situation that has happened is definitely putting Nigeria in a different light. I mean, it's kind of showing Nigeria's inability to kind of settle debts. But isn't that the story for most African countries that are indebted to the Chinese? Like, show me one country that has paid back the Chinese fully, and they don't have the Chinese, that are not connected to any of the Chinese, an African country or a third world country. I mean, I would love to see that, because I feel like that would give us so much hope. So if you are there in the comment section, let us know which African country is not indebted to the Chinese, and then we'll move on from there. Now, when I saw this clip and this story, it's actually quite recent. It's actually the 28th of August. I thought to myself, how many countries or how many third world countries are indebted to the Chinese? How many countries are at the risk? How many countries could have what they own taken away because they have defaulted on a certain debt? Which country has the most to lose? Should the Chinese say, you know what, we are going after every African country that we gave money or we gave a loan to? Can you imagine if we lived in a world where the Chinese said, you know what, you need to pay pay up and give us the money. I want to give you guys examples of these African countries that are indebted to the Chinese, and then we'll move on from there. Coming in at number 1, we have Zambia. Now, in 2020, Zambia became the first African country to default on its debt during the COVID-19 pandemic. Watch this clip and let's get back to it.
Struck an historic agreement on restructuring debt for some of the world's poorest nations. The move goes beyond the current deal to freeze debt repayments until June next year, and is significant because it includes China. Beijing has been reluctant to sign up to any deal that would cancel or restructure debts. Well, China accounts for 63% of overall debt owed to G20 nations in 2019. It's not known exactly how much money China is owed, but various estimates say the country has given out loans worth $1 trillion to $5 trillion in the past 20 years. And that's a problem. The United States and many Western private lenders have been unwilling to discuss restructuring debt for the poorest nations because they don't want to bail out Beijing. China's gone as far as classifying state lenders as private institutions to avoid scrutiny. Most of the money has been spent on rolling out its Belt and Road Initiative to build infrastructure and increase its influence in mostly developing nations. Its largesse has come at huge cost for many of the 138 nations that have signed up to the program. Now, despite that historic G20 deal, a number of countries are close to defaulting on their debts as the pandemic decimates economies. Zambia became the first African defaulter of the COVID-19 era. It has the backing of many anti-debt campaigners who are encouraging more nations to join Zambia in threatening default. Zambia's problems predate the pandemic. It's Africa's second biggest copper exporter, and as copper prices tanked, it found it more difficult to meet its payments. It's thought the country has $11 billion worth of debt. Negotiations have hit a wall because of debts it owes to China. It's thought that Zambia owes China about $3 billion, but China...
There you have it, guys. Zambia has an $11 billion debt to China. I mean, saying it out loud is kind of like, oh my God, this is so unreal. Like when I was doing research on this, I was just like, okay, this is happening. This is real. Very soon they may come and take the whole country apart. But recently Zambia and China have gotten to an agreement where they are working towards repaying that debt. Now let's move on to the next country that actually is also very much so indebted to China. That is Sri Lanka with the Hambantota port. I hope I'm saying it right. Let's watch this.
Country into a debt crisis. Sri Lanka owes most of its debt to China. Locals blame the weakened coalition government of Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe for this. It seems chaos follows China wherever it goes. Take a look.
All roads leading up to Asian ports are normally bustling with activity. But that is not the case with Sri Lanka's Hambantota port. Despite being open for more than 7 years now, the port's facilities have barely been used. The Hambantota port was built by a state-owned Chinese company and funded by loans from Beijing. Struggling to pay its debts, Sri Lanka formally handed over the Hambantota port to China on a 99-year lease last year. The Sri Lankan government now stares at a mountain of debt, mainly due...
And there you have it, guys. That is Sri Lanka for you. They literally just handed over a port to the Chinese because they were unable to pay off the debt they had with the Chinese. And when you think about it, it's just like, imagine, let's say like a country like Kenya, you know, they have that port right there. Imagine them handing over the revenue generating asset because they weren't able to pay something. Do you understand the economic impact that would have on a country like Sri Lanka? And you've seen from the video, people were fighting back and blaming the government for what was happening currently because they went into these agreements or these contracts with the Chinese without thinking ahead or without thinking of the people on ground. How would they feel and how will they actually be able to repay this debt? Because at the end of the day, if I remember my economics very well, for a country to be able to repay that debt, the citizens must be taxed. So you can imagine your government gets into a contract with a certain Chinese company and then your government is literally milking you dry to pay up that debt because it was unable to pay said debt. And obviously the standard of living is affected, because how are people going to live when the taxes are extremely high? They are in debt. Even the looming fear that anytime now your assets as a country could be taken. Who wants to live in a world like that? Moving on, let's head over to Kenya, our neighbors. Now, Kenya, the SGR is the railway from Nairobi, the city, to Mombasa. It's actually really nice. I like the system. It's very efficient and it's also quite affordable. But here's the catch.
Kenya on Thursday denied it had defaulted on interest payments on a loan advanced by China for the construction of a railway line from the port city of Mombasa that opened in 2017. The $5 billion project, financed 90% by China, replaced the so-called Lunatic Express, a line built more than a century ago by colonial power Britain, which was notorious for lengthy delays and breakdowns. Kenya's Business Daily reported that the government failed to repay interest on the loan in the financial year ended June, attracting a fine of $10.8 million. But the Treasury Cabinet Secretary rejected the report as misinformation that the financial position of the East African economic powerhouse was sound and robust. The railway was to be managed.
There you had it. The lady said there are concerns about Nairobi taking on more debt than it can afford. But I feel like that's the story for most African countries, because so many African countries are in debt that they cannot afford. They are taking up debt that they know their great grandkids are going to suffer for that debt, and certain assets of the country will be taken away. I mean, you've seen with Nigeria when the French court actually ordered China to go and seize their jets, just like that. Gone in a minute, just like that. And like I mentioned before, the looming feeling that what you have can be taken away. It's also looming for Kenya, because you can imagine if China decided to take away the Mombasa port from Kenya, do you know how that would affect so many things in this country? Because for East Africa, the Mombasa port is actually really important. For a country like Uganda, we rely so much on Kenya for so many things. Now imagine they close that port, or they give that port to an entity like China. What would happen? I leave that to you to come up with that answer, because I don't want to discourage you that much. Let's move on to Angola. Now, Angola's oil for debt deals with China. Let's watch that video.
The advantage of higher oil prices to accelerate its debt reduction plans and smooth out repayments to China, which is its largest creditor. Africa's second largest crude producer owes China $18 billion, which is about 40% of its total external debt, after settling loans totaling $1.32 billion this year. Angola's debts as a proportion of the gross domestic product is projected to fall to about 61% next year. That's down from 66%, which at this point in time, and more than 100% was the position in 2020. Well, this attributed improvement in the metric to a rebound in economy, the nation's currency, and the government.
There you have it. Now, Angola has repaying its Chinese loans with oil. You know what? Let me repeat that. Angola has been repaying its Chinese loans with oil, which has led to a significant portion of its oil production going to China, and the country is left bare, limiting its ability to benefit from its own resources. Now, please think about that. You may be asking yourself, like, Joanne, where are you going with this? Where are you going with this? Where am I going with this? I'm showing you a future. I'm showing you what's happening on ground. I'm showing you what's happening on ground. If most African countries do not come together and say, you know what, we need to find ways to pay back this debt or do away with debt. Imagine being in a country and you have all these resources that can be taken away from you because you are heavily, these numbers, I was looking at these millions, I'm like, trillions, billions, I'm like, friend, when are you ever going to pay back all that money? They could take away everything that you own as a country. Your great grandkids are going to suffer for this loan that most African leaders are picking up. And, and in the end, like I mentioned before, it's the citizens that suffer. you know? It's the citizens that suffer because they are going to be taxed so that this debt can be repaid. Let's move on to the last country. Like I mentioned before, I wanted to show you guys the African countries that are having an active date with the Chinese, and their assets would also be taken away. But let's watch this video and then get back to it.
Ethiopia says that despite recent challenges, its economy is in shape and performing well, which will enable it to pay off its debt to China in a timely fashion. Beijing has helped Addis Ababa restructure its debt, and the African nation is looking forward to further cooperation in development, financing and foreign direct investment. CGTN's Girimchala has more.
Since 2000, China's loan and investment in Ethiopia has been significantly growing, impacting the Ethiopian economy positively. Thanks to the funds from the Export and Import Bank of China, all infrastructure and industry-related projects have been made a reality here. Ethiopian authorities now...
All right, guys, there you have it. That is from Ethiopia. Now, this dam, which is the Renaissance Dam, actually had so many conflicts. I wouldn't say conflicts, but there was some sort of controversial, something going on because, Egypt was saying, oh, why are you diverting the water to do da-da-da? We're relying on the water. Sudan, South Sudan and North Sudan also had the war-torn countries, so they were also going through something. Well, Ethiopia was trying to do that with the dam. What am I trying to get at here? So they also went ahead and signed a contract with the Chinese to build this dam. And guys, like I have been showing you that nothing comes free when you get loans from the Chinese. There are consequences to everything that you borrow from the Chinese. It's not going to just be given to you and forgotten. Even when COVID came in, they almost forgot some dates, or they did forget some dates, but not everyone was off the hook. There's so many other countries that are still heavily indebted to the Chinese. Now, what's the solution to this? Because I could just go on and on and on. Africa is this, Africa is that, African countries are this, African countries are that. They are indebted, they are so badly off. And the one thing that I can think about that most African countries can do, there's so many other things, but the one major thing that stands out to me, there is one, is if most African countries actually plan to diversify their economy. Now, we are going to look at a video from our beautiful neighbors in Rwanda. By the way, I don't know why people call it Rwanda. It's not Rwanda, it is Rwanda. Let's watch that and come back here.
Rwanda, with 70% of the population engaged in the sector and around 72% of the working population employed in the country. Rwanda is also linked by road with other countries in the African Great Lakes region, via which the majority of the country's imports and exports are made. The country has an international airport at Kigali, serving one domestic and several international destinations. The airport has international flights to Lagos, Brazzaville, Dubai, Nairobi, Entebbe, Addis Ababa, Bujumbura, Johannesburg, Amsterdam, Brussels, and Doha, and it is the main airport. 2013. The sector is the biggest contributor to the national export strategy. The sector has also attracted direct foreign investment with major international hotel brands, $373.4 million of foreign exchange. Rwanda's mineral resources include cassiterite,
and there you have it, folks. A country like Rwanda that does not just depend on one sector to generate its revenue is what each African country needs to do, Instead of relying on one sector and saying this is where all the money is going to come from, imagine if we decided to make sure that most of the sectors that any African country has is bringing in money and not just sitting idle or sitting bare. I also want us to look at Botswana and see what they have to say.
Exception. Botswana. Botswana today is the world's second largest producer of gem diamonds and is the world's fastest growing economy, with an average annual growth rate of about 5% over the past decade. It is one of the handful of upper middle income countries in sub-Saharan Africa, with the GDP per capita recently estimated at over $19,300. This places it ahead of the fastest emerging economies like Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia and India. Over the next 4 decades, Its economic growth rate rivaled that of China, Singapore, and South Korea. And today, it is one of the richest countries in Africa.
There you have it right there. I feel like I brought on the perfect examples. They called Botswana the most peaceful country. I hope to visit that one sometime. But I hope that, shows us that it's very possible. Each African country is very capable of not relying on debt, not relying on foreign powers to fund their infrastructure. Each African country, with all the resources that they have, can be able to do something for themselves. Okay? Now that's it from me today. Let me know what you think in the comment section. I would love to hear it. I will be there to also interact with you. So I am looking forward to that. Also, please follow me on my social media page at Jonita Maaya on all platforms. You won't miss me when you get there. Also, please shop some merch. Uganda looks good on me. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.